As a quick review of the Nagant Revolver, it was designed in 1881 by a Belgian by the name of Emile Nagant. He had contributed the magazine interrupter in the Mosin Nagant rifle, which is why the Russians usually just call it the Mosin as opposed to the Mosin Nagant like the Americans call it. This particular pistol is a 1932 Tula. It was imported by PW Arms, Redmond, Washington. I bought it through J&G. J&G Sales had it shipped to my local FFL dealer. Picked it up today. Put 50 rounds through it. It's not the greatest shooter, but it's actually pretty accurate for something that's kind of old and still has some Cosmoline on it. They'd taken it out of the box about 5 minutes before I arrived, so it actually shot quite well. As you can see from the little screw right here, moderate disassembly is pretty easy. You can just pull that right out. The disassembling the cylinders really quick. Actually, it would probably be quicker to just carry around loaded cylinders with you and reload that way, because combat-wise, the loading gate that you can see right here is actually pretty damn tricky to operate. You gotta pop the loading gate out and then individually unload every cylinder. And then you can do that with this right here. However, when I was at the range earlier today, I found it easier to just take the cleaning rod that is included with the holster and just have that out ready to poke them out. Because otherwise you got to unscrew that, rotate it out, and then poke them out individually with that. So combat-wise, probably not the wisest design for speed of reloads, but it was a decent little shooter. It's in 7.62 because it simplified the tooling for the Russian arms industry. So what you have here is a 38mm long brass casing, the flare on the front of the bullet to allow the gas seal, which you can see when the pistol is cocked, which takes quite a bit of force. It actually moves forward and engages that gas seal right there. Now that brass has that flare that engages the gas seal itself. When the bullet goes through and exits the brass flares and forms a seal there, theoretically giving it a higher feet per second velocity coming out of the barrel, but it's still a fairly underwhelming round, especially considering some of the other calibers used in World War I and II. The 45 at roughly the same velocity, 850 feet per second, but the 45 round weighs 230 grains, whereas this in FMJ form, I believe in the military loading was 110 grains, and the common civilian target loads nowadays are about 95 grains. Very little recoil, not very loud, but kind of underwhelming. And I'm sure it's killed plenty of people, but at the same time, I would much rather have a 9mm Parabellum or a 45. When I ordered it from J&G, it came with the lanyard. You see here attached to your belt or your holster, so you wouldn't lose the pistol, which we still do today. And then came with this pretty nice little holster built in 1965. It's actually dated up here. The Russians were trying to phase this pistol out in the 30s, which is why the Tokarev came out and why it's called the TT-33. It was adopted in 1933. However, they weren't able to manufacture them in enough quantities to really replace the Nagant Revolver. So the Nagant Revolver remained in service at the Russian army until after World War II. Until the Tokarev was replaced with the Makarov, it remained the standard service pistol. But all in all, it's a fun little pistol. They're incredibly cheap. They're really easy to find. If you can't find them, your FFL dealer will do transfer for between $20 and $30, bringing the total price to about $120. The ammunition, however, is pretty damn expensive. Apparently, you can fire 32 Smith & Wesson long and 32 H&R Magnum out of here, but it's not really recommended. The 32 longs, especially with the lead non-coated bullets, will actually coat parts of the working mechanism of the cylinder and kind of jam it up a little bit. So you have to be really careful with those. And then the H&H Magnums, it's much higher case pressure than what these revolvers were designed to handle. So it's maybe a safety concern. The the round as it is I mean it's expensive. It's about $30 for a box of 50. You can find it cheaper online, but then you have to worry about hazmat handling fees and the shipping costs themselves. So unless you're buying in bulk, it doesn't really make sense to buy them online unless you're just so far from a Cabela's that you can't make it there. Although the gas would counterbalance the cheaper price online. But all in all, it's a fun little pistol to play with. You can put I put a number 8 nut inside here between a little V spring, the main spring that gives you your trigger or your hammer and your firing pin the forward momentum that is required to actually bust the primer. I put a little nut in there and it actually lightened the trigger pull considerably, but it made a pretty nasty little clicking sound. I wasn't too sure about using it while firing the pistol, so I wound up taking it out. But it's a simple modification that doesn't involve you actually changing the gun at all, and you can remove it 5 minutes later if it feels sketchy to you. But it does lighten the insanely heavy trigger pull. Somewhere in the 20-pound vicinity. And I've got fairly strong fingers, but single action with one hand on it's a little tricky. Or double action with one hand on it's a little tricky. Single action, it's about 12. It's a pretty heavy trigger pull. But that's mostly because cocking the hammer moves that cylinder forward as well as rotating it. So it's just got a lot more mechanical contrivance to it than the average double action trigger pull. And correspondingly, it's very heavy. The sights are pretty limited. You have a very small rear notch here. The blade is pretty good size. It's not very visible in dark sights, but in bright light like here in this living room, it's pretty easy to see. Mine seems to fire very high. With a sight picture like this, it'll fire high and to the left. It patterns pretty consistently. However, the shot groups are very consistent, but it was high and to the left. But all in all, I'd say get one. They're fun. If nothing else, it's a cool little oddity to have around the house.